Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. It's Tuesday, the 3rd of June, 6:55 p.m. Went to town today, did some grocery shopping, and just some other little odds and ends. I go to town about twice a month, or about once every 3 weeks, actually. It's nice. I don't like to leave the mountain that much, though. It's like town is a whole other world. I'm not even sure I could go and spend a month in Canada, like a big city like Toronto or something now. It's just the way I've acclimatized myself to the peace up here. And it is very peaceful up here. And, I don't know, it's kind of nice to go to town, though. You know, see all the people. Not a huge town, maybe like 25, 30,000 people. Latin American town on the Caribbean coast. Siquiris, it's called. Siquiris. That's where I get all my mail, at the Siquiris post office. And, yeah, it's kind of fun, go to the grocery store, get your stuff, do what you got to do. You know how it is, folks. Yeah. So tonight I'm going to do a podcast that I'm titling The Reality of Imagination. And this is a topic that really kind of gripped my 20s. I think I was about, 26 when I had this realization. And it was an affectation of the inner work. If you haven't noticed, the Talamanca Review is always advocating that you spend time with yourself. Okay? You call it what you will. I'm not going to force any system on you. They're all, in their own ways, culturally derived and part of the history of a place and a people. But they have certain uniform consistencies. And one of those uniform consistencies is that the key to the growth of consciousness, or as a Christian might say it, proximity to God, is to spend time in silence, silent prayer, silent contemplation, silent reflection, silent meditation on the Bible. In my system, it's the exact same thing, except I just use a few things that I figured out over the years through trial and error. Like, the contemplative life is a lot like any other aspect of life. You put a little bit of time into it and you're going to kind of figure stuff out, okay? It's like the first time you play golf, you might shoot 120, right? You don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to putt. You don't know how to drive. You don't know how to chip. You don't know how to use woods in the fairway on a par 5. Takes time. You learn it all, right? It's the same thing with the inner life, right? Same thing with the inner life. Now, I think it's well worth your time to do this, and I think it's well worth your time to make it an integral part of your life. I could probably make that sound scarier, and, but I won't. Everybody gets there in the end. It's just about what you endure on the way. So, everybody gets there in the end. I'm finally getting around to getting my residency over here. So, I have an appointment in San Jose on the 13th of June in 10 days to get my fingerprints taken, and then I have to mail them to Canada and get a background check, and then I have to get a long-form birth certificate, apostilled. A whole process, man. And, but it'll be nice to have my residence. I can do a lot more with my residence. I think because I'm applying for a residency with marriage, I'll be able to work here too, which is kind of interesting. I wouldn't mind training young Costa Rican technical writers. That would be a fun job, Yeah. A lot of tech coming to Costa Rica now. I think Intel put in a chip factory, $1 billion deal with Costa Rica. That's a big deal, folks, and I'll tell you why. This is only a country of 4.5 million people. This whole country is smaller than most American cities, big American cities. So, yeah, people don't really realize that when they consider Central America, that these countries are very small. I think the most populous one is maybe, I don't want to say, I'll probably get it wrong, but they're all around the same. El Salvador is, I don't know, a few million people. Yeah, let's just check that up, okay? Because we like to do that, don't we? What are the populations of the Central American countries? Yeah, and we'll just sort of. So Guatemala is the biggest. It's got 18,937,776. That's pretty big. Honduras has 10,484,000. El Salvador 6,338,000. Nicaragua 6.685 million. Costa Rica 5.129 million. I was wrong at 4.5. Panama 4.515, and Belize at 417,072 people. So there you go. Those are the populations of the Central American countries. And so when Intel comes to Central America, you know something's up. That's another thing too, right? Is that I only know how bad the world is because I'm Canadian and I follow the news in English. But yet, from other people's perspective, I don't know, it's not going too well. It's like they kind of have, like, I would say, this like favored nation status is how they do it, this favored nation status, whatever is controlling this world. And I would say we the victors of World War II, our European allies and North America and Australia and New Zealand, we were sort of like the it countries from the end of World War II till about now, or about 10 years ago. And the dismantling actually started some time ago. I'd say the formal declaration of the dismantling was 9/11. And very symbolic, with the World Trade Towers collapsing in New York City, the ostensible capital of the Western world. It doesn't get any more dramatic than that, and that's why they did it, right? I don't think there's even anything to argue about these things anymore. It just is what it is. But let's segue into tonight's topic, because there's a lot of ironic mirror in the imagination, okay? One of the ironies is that when you master imagination, you see reality more clearly than anybody else. And it's ironic because we consider the imagination to be fanciful, childish. But it isn't. It is truly and uniquely the gateway to reality. Okay? So, I've been a number of Western poets who have figured this out too. As I said, William Blake, Wallace Stevens, John Donne, Coleridge, Shelley. Really in the Romantic period, they talk about the power of imagination. And I'm pretty sure this was informed by participation in European secret societies is probably how they did it, okay? Makes complete sense when you think about it, when you know what's going on. Complete sense. I sort of figured it all out on my own, with a little help from the poets and coupled with my meditation. Let's get into it. So I'm going to begin from the beginning. And this essay I wrote in, 1992 or 93, quite some time ago, like 32, 33 years ago. It really holds up today, man. I wrote this in a little concrete bomb shelter of an apartment I lived in, a little town. Little town is like a 500,000 people in Taiwan, but a little town of 400,000 people, about 45 minutes outside of Taipei. And I was enamored with Chinese society, and I wanted to understand how they saw reality. And so I studied their cultural foundations. It's fascinating when you get into it. You know, one of the people don't consider how removed Asia is from the Western system. The Western system has certain commonalities in it, irregardless of what your particular cultural background is, whether that be, Protestant, Catholic, or Jewish, which are the three really sort of founding consciousnesses of the West. It's Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish. Okay? And all of that melded into a Western system that begins in that region. Let me see what it's called here. It's the Gulf where the Red Sea is, right? Let me just look this up here. Israel. Okay, I gotta type it out. Sorry, folks. I'm using Apple Macs. I redid all both my Mac computers yesterday. So on the M1, I did a complete reinstall of the operating system, and here we are. I did a complete reinstall of the operating system, and because when you buy these M-class silicon, new Mac silicon computers, to get the best deal, you generally don't buy them with a lot of internal storage, because although the base models are really well priced for Macs, they get you on the upgrades, right? So to even get 2 terabytes of internal storage, you're gonna pay $800 US, which exceeds the value of the computer by about 25%. So 125. The computer is $599, and it's another $800 to go from 256 gigabytes, which is the base model, to 2 terabytes. So what you do in this system is you buy external SSDs and you connect them with Thunderbolt 4 or USB-C cables, and there's no lag. An external SSD now is as fast as an internal. And so I studied online this way of setting up the computer so all of your applications are on an external drive, and you keep your main computer fairly clean. So of the original 256 gigabytes, I won't go beyond 60, 70 gigabytes. I store everything on my 1 terabyte external storage devices, of which I have 3. No, it's kind of fascinating. So I redid all my computers yesterday, and then when I did the reinstall, I realized that, Mac Maps or Apple Macs is really good, and like it's good or better than Google Maps. I kind of like it, actually. Okay, so let's get this here. Where are we looking here? So it doesn't actually give me the name of the place. It's the Red Sea, basically, okay? It's that Gulf of Aden, or whatever you want to call it. It just talked up Apple Macs, and they're not even giving me the name of the Gulf here. What is the name of that waterway? Oh, you know what? It's because I have to switch from satellite to it's the Mediterranean Sea. You see, that's how dumb I am sometimes, folks. It's like shameful how dumb I am, but I don't care. Okay, so it's the Mediterranean Sea is really where it all begins for us in the West, because in that little horseshoe there, you've got Cyprus, You've got um, Cairo. You've got Israel and Jerusalem. And you've got, of course, Athens, right? Greece. And it's a fairly small area, so they could sail it. And I mean, you could go by land, but this is the cradle of Western civilization. And it's not just the religious ideas, it's the mathematical and philosophical and ideas on society and these sorts of things. And so the West isn't just Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish, it's also Greek. You know, the Greeks gave us the early forms of math, geometry, trigonometry, and they gave us our founding philosophy for this epoch. You know, coincidentally, at the very beginning of the age of Pisces, around 2500 BC. 500 BC, 2500 years ago. And we've been living by it ever since. And we're switching over now. I think that when you switch from one age to another, what happens is the entire consciousness infrastructure accessible to the collective consciousness of humanity changes. It's like you go into another room in the funhouse, and it's this learning cycle. But we had Aristotle, Pythagoras, Socrates, and all of these sorts of things, right? The foundation of Western philosophy, Western moral philosophy, and Western reason, which is the beginning of, what we would call an objective truth. Now, in the East, they don't even have that. It's not just that they don't have our religion, Protestant, Catholic, or Jewish. They don't even have the Greek philosophers. They don't really study them. They don't understand them. When you're over in the East, it all comes down to a handful of people. And Mencius and Confucius are the Greek philosophers of China. And they had a different take on life. And it's as rich and deep as, Aristotle. And it's as rich and deep as Socrates in its own way, if you're open-minded. And the interesting thing is, right from the beginning, they emphasized harmony. Okay, harmony is the overriding principle of Asian society. You don't want to be that goof on the subway in Shanghai, playing the music so loud on his earpods that everybody else can even hear it slightly. That it's considered extremely rude to violate the space of another person in most Asian societies, Japan and China. Not so sure about Korea. They've been very well anglicized. Very well anglicized. And then you get, Taoism is the only native Chinese religion. Buddhism was imported from India. You all know the story of Siddhartha, the Indian prince who left the castle and the kingdom the walled kingdom he lived in, and went out and saw the world and saw the suffering and decided that he was going to answer the question of what causes suffering. And he did. And it's just that not many people like the answer or have the discipline to live the remedy. But he did more or less figure it all out. So when I was in Taiwan, I wanted to understand this world as they lived it from the ground up. And I had a lot of fancy schmancy students, okay? I was what you would call a pedigree English teacher over there. And by pedigree, I mean I had a really good language-based degree. I had a journalism degree from a very well-reputed North American university for that school. And I was able to get some really choice corporate gigs. Also, in getting a journalism degree, I learned English grammar much better than most people. And, you can get asked the weirdest questions when you're over there, like, teacher, what's the difference between much and more? And you can give them, most people, like when I ask you that question now, I say, what's the difference between much and more? And you would probably, as a speaker, not misuse more and much and get them confused, but you've probably never stopped to think about why it is, So how much money do you have? Well, a lot. Yeah, I have a lot of money. How much money do you have? How many 20s do you have? How many $20 bills do you have? So the differences between countable and uncountable nouns, stuff like that. So when people are learning a language as a second language as adults, or after they've learned their primary language, they're much more deconstructive and intellectual about it. It's not an osmotic learning process the way our mother tongues are learned by just hearing it, and then practicing. And so because I was pretty good at grammar and I'd already been writing pretty seriously on my first book, I had this reputation, and then other foreigners over there, if they get a request for a good English teacher at something like, let's say, Hewlett Packard in Taiwan or IBM at Taiwan, the executives want an English class, a lot of people over there teaching English would turn that down because it would be very humiliating for them because they don't understand the grammar of their language. And I used to love those contracts, and so I would go and I would do them. And I met all these interesting people. Now, one of the things that Mencius and Confucius stressed in their harmony of society was honor the teacher. And so a teacher is a celebrated figure in Asian society, very celebrated figure. And so your students would want to get you gifts all the time. And you say no a few times, they keep asking. And eventually you have to come up with something. I could tell you some of the stuff I've heard about what other foreigners over there, asked for. It's kind of comical, but I would always ask for Chinese classics in translation to English. And so I would say something like, teacher, what do you want? Bruce, what do you want? And I'd say, can you get me the collected works, however many volumes it is, of Mencius in English? And they would look at each other, and then they would look at me, and they would go, are you serious? I say, yeah. And can you get me the Analects of Confucius in English, a really good translation? Find out which is the best English translation. Are you serious? I'd go, yeah. And then I would go, move into the Taoist texts. Can you get me the Inner Chapters by Zhuangzi, a really good English translation? And they're like, have you read the Tao Te Ching? I said, yeah, I've already read the Tao Te Ching. But if you can find me a really good English translation of that, I'll take it as well. And they would go out and not only fulfill your request, they would come back with a stack of books. And this is the early 90s. And they'd come back with $100 and $150 worth of books, like everything in the best immediate library on the topic you asked about. And I'll tell you another little thing, and I realize I'm not really getting to imagination, but I'm working up to it. And it's just the way the Talamanca Review works, right? They generally thought that Westerners were lazy, and so they were thinking, well, he's just trying to impress us by asking for these books. He's not actually going to read them. And then as the months went by, and I would make references to the books, and in the course of teaching English, they would go, holy cow, he's really reading them. And not only that, this round eye seems to have some understanding of Mencius. How's that possible? So I put myself into this kind of vacuum of Chinese culture, and I wanted to understand a reincarnation culture. And there are dogmatic aspects to a reincarnation culture that are positive and negative. The positive would be they're more relaxed about things, right? The negative is they're more relaxed about things. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, you get to this kind of colloquial understanding of karma in a karma-based society. So if somebody were to hit someone on a car, and they're on a motorcycle, it's late at night, and they hit them, they may just keep driving. And this would be normal people with no criminal inclinations. Okay, and they would just keep driving because nobody saw it, it wasn't filmed, and the consequence of dealing with what they did would be quite severe, because if the person lived, they would be responsible for all medical bills, and I think a disability pension while the person was unable to work. This is Chinese law. Chinese law is basically you own what you do. It's like the purest form of English common law. Like, it's really, really quite something. Yeah, do whatever you want, but you own it. There's no insurance policies over here. You own it, right? So, you want to speed and break the rules of the road and take risks. Okay. You'll probably never get a speeding ticket, but anything happens, you own it. Now, if they die, you owe what's called a death benefit. And I think at the time the death benefit was $6,000. You had to pay the family $6,000 for killing their loved one with your vehicle. It's very weird. So the thinking there is, to relate it back to the karma, the thinking there was, well, I'll pay for it in my next life. Right? So they use their culture and their religion in the same sort of nonsensical and rationalization that we use ours. Okay? And this is, of course, defective religion. It's non-practiced religion. It's religion that becomes a cultural expression, but no longer a religious or spiritual expression. And you'd be amazed how true this is for most parts of the world. Even if you were to go to India now, you'd find that most of what you've heard about their religious and spiritual expression is now just a cultural expression. It's stupid statues of Ganesh, it's lingas, it's all of this. Or the modern success story, the multi-billionaire Sadhguru and his Isha Foundation, right? Things like this. And, bless the man, he's trying to do some good, spread Vedic yoga. I think Vedic yoga is a highly constructive thing for a person to practice for well-being. So, bless the guy. I'm not saying anything critical here. So I went into a vacuum of Chinese thinking. I thought like a Chinese person. I spoke Mandarin. I still do. I've forgotten a lot of it now. But if you drop me in Beijing, I'd be fluent again in 6 weeks. It's all in the back of my brain. And I really wanted to understand their culture. I really wanted to understand it. And I got so into this, I would sometimes make requests to, like what I would call important students, and students who had Guanxi. And Guanxi is vast social influence. I would say, I really want to discuss this particular Taoist text. Can you set me up with an abbot or the master of a monastery? And I got it. But they would test you first, like, well, we don't want to waste this guy's time, Bruce. People come from all over the world to talk to this guy. You're like our 26-year-old Canadian English teacher. Why should we recommend you? And then you just start telling them the questions you have, and they'll go, yeah, you should probably. Then they go, yeah, you probably should speak to him. So I got to meet all these incredible people and cultural treasures while I was over there in Taiwan. And one of the things that I did was I wrote this essay. And it's not really an essay. It was part of a larger book, a novel I was working on called Red Dust. Red dust is what the Buddhists call the earth, the red dust. You're born into the red dust. And coincidentally, the word Adam in Hebrew, the first man, also means red dust. Okay? So very interesting there. So with this very long 30-minute introduction, let's get ourselves into the reality of imagination. Okay, so we're going to begin at the beginning. Okay? I'm going to go over some stuff I already went over in the first podcast in which I talked about this. And I hope that doesn't irritate you, but the language is so rich, so dense, and so layered that just speaking these words or reading them, and I will put the essay up as a text, is a form of meditation and contemplation. Okay, this is what meditation is, or one of the effects of meditation. It's a very meditative piece of writing, very Marcus Aurelius, if you will. All right. Now, anything that is dreamed is real. And what do I mean by that? Well, you could substitute imagine in there as well, okay? So dream here I mean as our inner life, our autonomous inner life, and which is different than deliberate visualization, like positive thinking people like Anthony Robbins and people like that. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But there's no such thing as positive or negative thinking. All thinking at a certain level is a negative from a spiritual perspective. Okay? So anything that is dreamed is real. Do you think that's true? Well, it is true. You cannot imagine something that does not have some form of reality to it. Okay? You can try and try and try. It's just not going to work. Okay? So what does that tell you? It tells you that the imagination is connected to reality in ways that we don't quite understand. And when you think about it, it makes complete sense. Because imagination is the interior life of us, and we are an organic being, meaning that we have life the same way everything else has life on this planet. We go through a creation process, which is the 9 months in the womb. We need a fertilization process to come into existence. Lovemaking, if you will. And then we come into the world, and these bodies are composed of the elements of this world. And we interact with the elements of this world, both internally and externally. We have water inside of us, and we can swim in water. We use fire for many things. We use fire for transportation in a combustion engine. We use it to cook food. We use it to stay warm. We use it to clear areas that we want cleared that might be too hard to hack apart, so we just do a controlled burn. We use water. Air. Air is a huge one, right? It's the foundation of most of the cosmic consciousness development, which is the yogic paths, the secret society paths. And this is superluminal mental awareness. It's not quite the same thing as spiritual awareness. And that's something I try to stress on the Talamanca Review. But this imagination is born inside of us. And it's a connection, it's a tether line to the whole of the universe and even to beyond the universe. But the imagination can't take you beyond it all, beyond the constructs of the body, the emotions, the memories, and the mind. But you're going to go through a lot of imaginative processes to get to the point where you can get out completely. Okay? By the way, I am talking about breaking the Gnostic chains here. Okay? So the idea that we're trapped here is erroneous. We're only trapped here if our astral bodies are too dense, if we haven't done any refinement work in our life, any spiritual work. Okay? And I don't even think even the astral body is trapped here anymore. I think on the other side, it's all been liberated, and we're just going through the motions in this 3D reality, which is always after, in the creative process, the 4D reality. So the 4D reality is worked out, and then it's like a 3D printer, and our reality gets printed from the astral, our timeline, the circumstances, everything. It's the adjustment bureau. Okay? So anything that is dreamed is real. If you can imagine something, there's some reality to it, even if you can't quite grasp what it is in the moment. But you can put that in your ledger of truths, and you can use that as an absolute truth every time you're trying to negotiate something in your consciousness. What is the reality of this imagining? Okay? What is the reality of it? Now, the imagination is always generally working with a pure heart. So if you have a negative imagination or negative imaginings, then chances are you're being told something about yourself. Okay? Anything that is dreamed is real. Now, anything that is dreamed can become real. Okay? So you first see it, and then there's a reality to it because you've seen it. You know, no act is complete without the witness. Without a witness, it never happened. If a tree falls down in the forest, if nobody hears it, does it make any noise? Yes, it does. The vibrations go through the air, and all the life forms there can experience it. It's recorded in the history of the planet. Everything is recorded down here. The most minute thing is recorded. You'd be amazed. It's 24/7 surveillance from a spiritual perspective. Everything that goes on down here is recorded. And these recordings form the basis of our afterlife review as well. Okay? So anything that is dreamed can become real. So you can bring anything, any dream into the world. Okay? So if what I just said is true, then we can assume that grasping at the unreal, or what we perceive to be unreal because it hasn't been manifest in reality yet, but it's an imaginative reality for us, grasping at the unreal is normal human behavior. But we don't look at it that way anymore, especially not in our completely perfunctory society. Completely and utterly perfunctory society. You're considered an idolater or somebody who is prone to being idle, fanciful, imaginative. Generally, it's always used in a derogatory way, not connected to reality. Well, the imagination is reality. So if you have a prolific imagination, you're more connected to reality than most people. Okay? You just probably haven't studied your imagination closely enough. Okay? You haven't allowed it to speak to you. And why would you? I mean, nobody teaches us that. It is the basis of a contemplative life. You are, in a certain sense, studying imagination when you meditate. Sometimes you don't see anything, but a lot of times you do. Especially in the first 15 minutes when you sit down and all the sort of stress of the day goes through you. And you have all these imaginings of all of these emotionally charged events during the day, and we play them out in our imagination, right? It's what we do. We all do it. And so we got our engagements in the world charged us, and we use the imagination to discharge the energy by replaying it in our minds until we can come to some understanding or peace as involves the engagement. And I think this is more acute in many ways for women. Okay? The ability to, or the tendency to chew on something in the imagination. Okay? Now, if you're going to come to any understanding of the imagination, you have to be very honest. And honesty is just open-mindedness. It just means that you go into a circumstance without any assumptions about it. Okay? Now, when you see people engaged in their imaginations, you see it all the time. Like when you're walking down the street and you see some dude, some homeless dude, talking to the sky, what's he doing? Well, he's going through that discharge process, but he can't discharge because he's lying to himself. You understand? To have an honest discharge of astral energy, emotional energy, you have to be honest with yourself. Sometimes you have to forgive yourself. Sometimes you have to forgive somebody else. But if you can't do that, you're just going to go into this cycle of madness. Okay? It happens to everybody at some point in their life, and some people get very comfortable living in these states. Okay? Very comfortable living in them. Talking to themselves. Right? Remember what we said in The Devil in Us, that the devil is that chatter in your mind. And so why is the devil the chatter in your mind? Because you can't discharge the energy inside you. It's been bound to you or assigned to you, and you can't discharge it because you're not being honest with yourself. And when you're having problems with imagination or problems discharging something, that is where meditation is extremely useful, because you can go in, you can relax, breathe, and you can speak to your imagination. You can pray to your imagination. The imagination is a communication device that goes to other dimensions and goes into your unconscious. And the middle ground between the conscious and the unconscious is the imagination. And it will generally speak in images. It'll play little short movie clips for you, right? Now, people get locked into these things. When they're grasping at the unreal, so that the task is to make the unreal real. So when the unreal gets into you and you're talking to yourself and you're muttering, you're just kind of lost. And you've been betrayed by your own imagination because you refuse to listen to the counsel of your own inner direction. Grasping at the unreal is therefore natural human behavior. I'd say it's the thing human beings do the most. Right? I mean, depending, right? I mean, it's, I'd say, more prevalent in well-off societies. You don't see a lot of people where I live, like the campesinos or the natives or the Nicaraguans, locked in themselves, unable to discharge. Right? It seems like to live that life and to invest so much energy in your own drama is a form of economic entitlement, for the most part. Okay? So if you're with me so far, you'll understand what I mean when I say that taking control of imagination is taking control of reality. So the imagination is the gateway to the fourth dimension. You can go beyond the fourth. You can go into the fifth and you can see the timeline, your past lives and all that stuff. But you got to clean up all your fourth dimension stuff before you get there. And cleaning up the fourth dimension stuff is really what the world is going through now. Okay? It's really what we're going through now. So to master reality, you have to master the imagination. Okay? Now, you could probably find exceptions to that rule right now, but we're living in so many layers of a lie right now. They're almost impossible to count. It begins with the money system, okay? So manifestation and mastering reality, it can seem like somebody who's very rich has mastered reality, but they haven't the way I'm describing it here. I'm talking about spiritually mastering reality, understanding what reality is and how it comes into existence from your perspective, from your individual incarnation perspective, your timeline, your events, and your circumstances. The general theory can be applied to collectives as well. So there's a collective experience of the West now in that we're being systemically dismantled and destroyed, sent to the scrapyard. Western society, Western Christian society, is no longer wanted in the world. They're going to scrap it. Okay? Now, we know that reality is not ours. But we also know that reality is holding something from us, or perhaps we've not learned to ask for it or how to ask for it. Because after all, longing forms questions. So the greatest taxes we put upon the imagination are the philosophical and spiritual taxes we put on it. Who am I? Where do I come from? How long do I have? What happens after this body dies? Those questions become longings. You have a longing for the answer. This is the beginning of the wisdom seeker's journey, where you can't put those questions aside. Some people can. They just get down to the daily tasks of life. They live it like a lottery ticket. Whatever happens, happens. Nobody can make sense of this. I'm not going to try to make sense of this. Every moment I waste trying to make sense of this, I'm not living. I'm not achieving my goals. So I'm just going to live. That's another approach to the same circumstance. And so, generally speaking, though, everybody will have those questions inside of them. Everybody does at a certain age. You know, it could be anywhere from like 5 years old to like 16, 17 years old. You're going to have those fundamental philosophical questions. Generally, depending on your maturity, your perceptual maturity, it generally coincides with the time at which you become conscious of the fact that things die. Your mom and dad are going to die. Your brothers and sisters are going to die. You're going to die. Your dog's going to die. Your cat's going to die. Your goldfish is going to die. So death becomes the great catalyst for the longing of imagination. Okay? That's pretty straightforward, right? Now you have to learn how to ask the imagination, and longing is the way you ask. It's the emotional fuel. Okay, because think of it like within the sacrifice model, you know, whether it be killing an animal in a temple or what have you. The energy you offer up from your heart to the longing in your imagination is the energetic offering that you're making to the universe. You're investing in the universe to have a return on your investment. This is important to you. It's important to you at a heart level. You're not going to be able to live correctly until you get the answers to these questions, and you want the answers to these questions. And so the longing is the fuel. This is the fulcrum of consciousness. It's emotional energy put through an image or an imagining of some sort. Okay? Now you can take what I just said and you can move it over here, and it's the exact same consciousness technology in the magical world. Okay? So this is what the sacrifices are about. It's gathering up the energy for the offering, because the sacrifice produces a reaction in the people. They have a reaction. You cannot be indifferent or apathetic to a seven-year-old child being sacrificed on a black obsidian stone altar. And so your reaction to that, your emotional energy that responds to that incident, is gathered up in the ritual by the orchestrator or the, let's say the tenor of the ritual, the high priest, and the energy is directed into an outcome, and the outcome may be in front of you symbolically in a sigil or a symbol or something, and all of your emotional energy goes into that. And that becomes the communication device that goes into the invisible worlds. And it's all done through this gateway of imagination fueled with human emotional energy. Okay? So when we can't answer these questions, we have fear. Right? Now, you either continue to seek an answer to the question, which is the great heroic journey, the spiritual quest, or you forgo the question and you live with the fear. Okay? Now look around you at all the people you know. And based on those two categories, you can probably put every single person you know into one of those two categories. Some may sit in the middle, but pretty much everyone generally goes into one of the two categories. So I'm the question answerer in my family. Everybody else in my family just never dealt with the fear and just used the fear as fuel. That's another thing people will do. They'll use that fear as fuel, another form of emotional energy, but it's a very dirty energy to run consciousness on. It produces disease, it produces anxiety, it produces mental imbalance. Yeah, but I'd say 80-90% of Western society functions on the energetic fuel of fear. What's going to happen if I lose my job? What's going to happen if I don't get my bonus? What's going to happen if I can't make my fear, man? Dig down. Get in there, buddy. Put in those 70-hour weeks. You can make it to senior regional manager. You do it, buddy. You're going to make it. You're going to make it. Because the alternative is... What is the alternative? It's unimaginable. And that's the fuel of our Western society. It's spiritually, it's got to be the most corrupt society in the world. Now, it's not everybody. There's some people who do tremendous things that are fueled by a kind of a compassion, a kind of unconscious bodhisattva, if you will. Somebody who goes into medicine is very bright, they get their medical degree, and they genuinely do research, and they generally learn how to cure a disease. And that's an exception to my rule, but it happens, but it's not the norm. Not the norm at all, okay? So we know that we're not whole because where there is fear, there is want. And want is suffering. Okay, so to want something is suffering. Desire is suffering. Remember I told you, this is why I prepped the whole first 30 minutes of this podcast with Bruce living in Asia and consuming. And it wasn't just the Buddhist stuff either. I mean the Taoist stuff. As I said, I read the philosophers Mencius and Confucius, and then I made my way into the sutras of the Buddha as well, which are as dense as calculus, by the way. Very, very dense theological dissertations by the Buddha, okay? But they're all there for anybody who wants to engage them. So this is what the fear does. It produces a want, and want is suffering. And so if you live with the fear, you live with the want. If you live with the want, you live with the suffering, okay? Now you know why so many people get high and drunk and can't really live their lives. Now you know why so many people stay busy. Now you know why so many people are afraid to meditate. Could you imagine being 40 or 50 years old and working in banking, finance, insurance, and getting up to that VP level, and you're making 400 grand? The last thing you want to do is sit still and contemplate the bigger questions of life. You've made it, man. Stay in the fast lane. If you start thinking too much, buy a new car, buy a new motorcycle, get a mistress, buy a fishing boat, buy a yacht, right? Distraction, distraction, distraction. Keep keep that consumption model going. And they know what they're doing on a certain level. I don't want to say everything's a conspiracy, but you could definitely say that if you looked at the 20th century closely enough, you could reasonably say that there's a lot of intent going into this, all right, to create this slavish consumer. Buy, 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 buy. Keep busy, keep busy, keep busy. Don't relax, don't relax. Where's my next distraction? I know a lot of people who can't sit still. A lot of people who can't sit still. Okay? The closest I'd say most people come, if they don't meditate, the closest that most people come in the West is spending an hour reading every night. But the quality of what they read these days, what people read, if the New York Times bestseller list is any indication, is so dismal. I'd say that's another form of distraction. Really, at the end of the day, it's just another form of distraction. Okay? Now, when you really start to analyze life and people, you will figure out, as I have figured out, that there are very few people actually living this life. Living it multidimensional, and transcending their fear, engaging the imagination, and in some instances going even beyond the imagination into the primal energies of life, which are in consciousness. And the primal energies are like the thunder and lightning of consciousness. Okay? These objectively manifesting energies in consciousness, and they're objective, but they generally aren't experienced except in deep meditators. Okay? I got through 2 paragraphs of 2 pages. This is going to go on for a while. So this is, we'll call it part 1 of the reality of imagination. Okay? I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.